Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of Cities of Tomorrow podcast series. I'm your host, Dr Hamed Tavakoli, and today we will talk about the Autistic Innovator, Reshaping Cities from the Inside Out. But before that, I would like to ask you a question. What is neurodiversity? I will respond to that myself. It is the idea that human brains are wired differently and that those differences are not defects to be fixed, but variations to be understood. Imagine stepping off a train at a peak hour. The noise hits first, then the crowd. The lights are too bright. The signs are confusing. The footpath is too narrow. A bus horns, a jackhammer, someone bumping to your shoulder without stopping. For many autistic people, this is not an occasional bad day in the city. It is, in fact, the everyday life. Today's guest decided not to wait for those systems to change from the outside. She changed them from the inside. Dr. Sharon Zivkovic is the founder and CEO of Community Capacity Builders, which is including the Center for Autistic Social Entrepreneurship. She is openly AuDHD, which means both autistic and ADHD. And she understands her neurodivergent mind not as a limitation, but as the engine behind every framework, tool, and social innovation she has spent 2 decades building. Welcome to episode 6, Sharon. I'll start with the first question. Where did you grow up and when did you first realize your mind worked differently? Is there a childhood memory or something that you can share about that?
Yeah, I grew up in the northern suburbs of Adelaide. Came out from England when I was 2 years old, so that was many, many, many years ago. And I knew from an early age that my mind worked differently because I couldn't take in the information at school. So by the end of primary, I had stopped attending school regularly, and then I was officially signed out when I was 14, because that was the legal age I could be signed out of school, because there was no point, because I just couldn't take the information in. And then in my 20s, I went back to the same high school as the only adult in the school, but I
Wow.
snuck in a tape recorder. And so I used to tape all the lessons, and then I used to come home at night and transcribe them all. But looking back, it wasn't having the information on paper that enabled me to learn. It was being able to see the information and to make associations with it. So I knew from a very early age that my brain worked differently.
And when did you realize destiny strength is not a shortcoming?
It took a long time. I mean, I knew because I could innovate and see things that other people couldn't see. I could see opportunities for products really easily that filled gaps. And so I was aware of it, but didn't have an understanding of the how until I got into reading a lot of work on autistic thinking that was written by autistic autism researchers. And then I was able to put the pieces together with regards to how that innovation process was happening. And also my approach to business development. So even though I taught social entrepreneurship for over 14 years at the university, I never used any of the tools myself that I was teaching. But I had my own business development process. So as I was reading through this work of autism researchers on autistic cognition, it made sense to me about, oh, that's how I innovate and that's how I develop businesses.
Beautiful. You point to 3 autistic strengths: systemizing, monotropic thinking, and bottom-up associative thinking. What are those mean in plain language?
I'll start with monotropism. it's an interest-based model of thinking about autism, because autistic people have these interest areas that we're quite passionate about. And because of, and so we're very focused on an interest area where traditionally neurotypical people, non-autistic people, they have what's called polytropic thinking. So they can think about a whole lot of different things and move from one area of knowledge to the other. But for autistic people, that shift from one body of knowledge to another is quite difficult. And so autistic people have these interest areas. And because of that, we, and we can get into a flow state. On average, the research says that on average, we spend 26 hours a week on an interest area. So we know a lot about our interest area. And because of that, the innovation and how we work, it's bottom up. So traditional thinking is thought of as top down, as in you frame an issue and then you go looking for the detail. For autistic people, it's bottom up. So we've got all this detail in our interest areas, and then how we think about that emerges. So the framing comes, so it's bottom up. And we see patterns, we see associations. We're associative thinkers, not linear thinkers. We're associative thinkers, so we see patterns in the data in our interest areas. And because of that, we're amazing systemizers. So systemizers both in being able to analyze systems and also in creating systems. So once autistic people understand that we're not poor non-autistic thinkers, we've just got a different, our cognition is different. And if we can go with the flow of how our natural thinking processes are, then we can do just amazing stuff.
Amazing. I'll learn a lot from these, specifically the fact that autistic people can focus on something in a way that other people really can't do that.
Yeah, and we get into a flow state, so it's a really pleasurable experience, and getting taken out of that flow. So if you were working for an employer and you're into something, and then they're saying, "Can you go do that?" It's really hard. That transition's really difficult for us.
Difficult, yeah, absolutely. Let's go to another question. When you step outside your front door and move through the city, what does that actually feel like? Like, what is happening in your body, mind, and people around you? The fact that people around you have no idea about that.
Yeah, so it's a sensory overload experience. So I'm taking in sound, I'm taking in visual, especially movement of people moving, smells. I'm taking all of this sensory experiences in at a greater, I guess, a greater level than what my mind can actually process it. And so it's quite overwhelming. It's an overload of sensory experience, more than my mind can take in. And then when you're out in a community or walking through a city, you've got to be able to get from where you are to where you want to go. And so with that overload experience happening, you've got to be able to find your way through a city. And so the signage and the actually having points where you can focus on to know that you're going the right way. You're looking for signs and street numbers, and as you've got all of this happening. And I mean, like for people who haven't got that kind of overwhelm, the fact that all the signs are different and the street numbers are in different positions and all the rest of it, you just tolerate that and get on with life. But for an autistic person, all those sorts of things make life more difficult. So it's this anxiety of knowing that you're overloaded sensory-wise, and then having to work your way through a city or to participate in an event.
Absolutely. You spoke about overwhelming condition for autistic people. Is it a design failure or is it a value failure or both?
I think it's firstly an education failure. So I think we're used to the idea of biodiversity and nature, and we're used to the fact of, diversity in sexuality and in race. But I don't know, for some reason, we've missed out on the whole idea of being taught that people's brains are different. And so there hasn't been this emphasis on the diversity of cognition. And so it starts with it starts with a lack of awareness of that, and from that we have the design failure. So everything in the world is designed for this average brain type, the kind of type of brain that most people have, sort of stuff. It's not a normal brain; it's just the average brain. And I've been thinking about, probably capitalism's got something to do with that as well, because the fact is, it's a lot easier to develop the one product that suits this one market. So there's this design failure because of the fact we're not actually catering to this diversity. But then I think there is also a values failure as well, because when people are made aware that there is parts of the population that have a different cognition, if they're not creating products or events for people that have this different cognition, then they're making a choice not to. They're making a choice to exclude people. So I think there is a values component to this as well.
Yeah, that's right. So you spoke about diverse cognition. Are our streets and parks and public spaces designed by neurotypical people only for neurotypical people? If this is the right claim, what would this cost us, the communities?
It costs this, a lack of participation by people that think differently. So, the reality is I every event, every opportunity to join in, I'm looking at what is that going to cost me? I'm looking at how difficult is it going to be to get there, what the experience is going to be like for me. And I make decisions about what I participate in based on how difficult it's going to be for me. And it's not only my participation that people miss out on, they miss out on the participation of my family and friends. Because my family and friends will ask me, how about going here? And I said, no, that doesn't, no, thank you. I remember a couple of years ago, I went to a fringe event and it was hell. Like my daughter bought tickets. I got there and I said, nah, can't do this. We're out of here. And so everyone had to go, this sort of stuff. So it's a case of, it's not only me, it's the people that love me, that, they won't go because I won't go. So we're missing out on that. And like some of the peak bodies for autism in Australia reckon that 1 in 40 people are autistic. And if you think about, that 1 in 40 and then their family and their friends, you're missing out on all that part of the population from coming to your events or participating in what you've got to offer.
Absolutely. So exclusion would be the first consequence of not having those people inside our design.
Yeah.
Sharon, I know that you've been involved in many decision-making processes and government agencies and so on and so forth. When you walk into a room with government agencies and decision makers, what is missed? What is something like, for example, in regards to neurodiversity, what is missed in our policies and decision-making processes?
I would say in our decision-making processes, I can tell if something's run well. If something's run well, I can participate quite easily. So if they've sent out an information pack, which, you know, enables me to predict how this is going to, how it's going to be run, that assists me with regards to knowing what's expected of me. If it's facilitated well and everyone's got the opportunity to contribute, I can contribute, you know, the same as other people. It's when things are not run well where I just want to escape, because it's a case of I'm finding that, you know, I've got all of this going on with regards to sensory overwhelm, and then I've got this inability to know what is coming next, because there is no structure to the participation event. And people, if, you know, and the thing is, I'll look for how things are being run. I'll you know, if there's networking time with a whole lot of small talk, you know, have that in the agenda of when that's going to happen, so people can make a choice of whether they want to participate in that part of the decision-making process or not. But, you know, if they don't make it, if it's not well run and autistic people don't participate, then they're missing out on the insights from people that think differently. And also, autistic people are generally more willing to say anything that's controversial that other people aren't willing to say, because we haven't got the same filters. You know, we don't see the world the same way, with regards to having filters and not saying stuff. So you'll get a very honest reaction from autistic people participating in those sorts of events.
Sharon, that's a really important point, that if you want to receive honest answers about your work, you need to participate with autistic people, because they've got different ideas about, you know, filtration of their ideas and thinking about the world surrounding them. There are some sort of specific policies about neurodiversity inclusion in our communities. Are they real, or they are just superficial and showing formalities?
Oh, I think they're nice. And so, you know, we're seeing sensory rooms at football matches, and sensory buses, and sensory rooms at concerts, and it's all very nice. And it's needed.
Yeah.
But I think if we really wanted to make a difference, we would be having sensory areas at the emergency rooms at hospitals, so people could go to hospital. I mean, there's a couple of times I've attempted to go into emergency when things have happened to me, and I last around 15 minutes, and then the sensory overwhelm's too much. I've got to leave, you know what I mean? And just hope that everything's going to be okay. As I'm aging, I think about, you know, no one mentions aging and autism. Like, it's not even thought about. But how, as an autistic person, are you supposed to go into a nursing home? You know, like, you know, there's some nice stuff happen, you know, really nice for politicians to cut a ribbon and all the rest of it. But, you know, if we wanted to get down to the serious stuff, you know, the stuff that is, you know, life and death needs to be addressed, that isn't getting addressed at all.
Absolutely. So is it a good idea of having another paper or another research about aging in autism with aged people or something like that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, like, I understand the emphasis on children, but those children are going to grow up.
Absolutely.
Sort of stuff. Like they're going to grow up, and there just isn't, you know. And I think about, like, I can't even explain what it's like as an older autistic person, because, you know, as I'm getting older, a lot of things, there's things that because I never had the therapy as a child, you know, so what they call is proprioception, like body awareness, is bad for autistic people anyway. But part of the aging process is your proprioception declines. And so if you've got this poor proprioception to start with because you're autistic, and then you age, and then you've got this declining proprioception, put the two together, and that's not fun. But there is no research even on bringing those two things together. Then there's having I got diagnosed last year with a mild cognitive impairment, which is generally a precursor to dementia, and which was quite a freak out. And then all my family was saying, but there's no difference. There's no. And then I was asking, well, how appropriate is the testing for mild cognitive impairment for autistic people? Because a couple of the questions were actually about drawing images, and I have aphantasia, so I can't visualize. So I'm thinking, how appropriate is the test for an autistic person to be able to do this? And I spoke to the person who is really the guru in this area at the Asia Pacific Autism Conference last year and said, how appropriate is the test for autistic people? And she said, we really don't know. What the hell? No, what do we? We've got all of these people who are going to get older, and we've got none of that figured out yet.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge gap in the literature about the, aging and autism. Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's a very
definitely.
Good call. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Sharon, I want to ask another question. I'll go to another chapter of your life, your wicked problems. But before that, closing this section, beyond the decision-making table, what is the one most uncomfortable truth about our cities, buildings, and public spaces that are physically built and nobody wants to talk about it?
Well, I think there's really two that really, I don't understand why they're not talked about more. One is noise pollution in our cities, and what we could be doing to reduce the noise pollution, which would make it easier for autistic people to walk around cities. And that comes into the whole design. And then the other one is about heat islands, urban heat islands. And how that's not talked about more. So, so the fact of having more green spaces, etc., in the cities, and having more, green walls, and just taking, less bitumen, more roads for, actually doing away with the bitumen and the cars, etc. Look, those sorts of things that are needed for other reasons. Would make life easier for autistic people, and would make life easier for a lot of other people as
Absolutely.
well. And so I think there's reasons to be making cities more autistic friendly that have got added benefits for things that we should be talking about, such as noise pollution and urban heat islands.
Absolutely. Let's move on to next chapter of your life. You co-founded Wicked Lab. What was it, and what gap were you trying to close that no existing organization was already filling? How does the work it did connect autistic entrepreneurship to broader social change?
It's interesting because when I look at the innovation processes I've done, it's always been from that body of knowledge and then the work emerging. And the model underpinning Wicked Lab was from my PhD research. And what I had taken was I'd gone through and looked at 4 different complex systems leadership theories and what they had to say about how you could transition a system from one state to another state. So it was that monotropic thinking of collecting all of this data of how you could do system transitions from one state to another state. And then I aligned that. I could see the association between that data and the well-known pathway for transitions of systems. And I aligned all those characteristics up to that. And so ended up developing a tool, a framework that could be used to track and measure systems change. And that that way of addressing problems by focusing on systems change from one state to another state is what's needed for addressing complex social policy problems called wicked problems. And when we think of what's required to move the current entrepreneurial ecosystem to a system that supports autistic entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs, it's that same process, that same transition. The difference really is, compared to traditional entrepreneurship, is that business development and social innovation approach is different than traditional business development approaches. And also, we need to get the participation of the disability sector as well. But that same transition process and being able to track and measure the system's transition is the same.
Absolutely. So let's move on to the next question. What does autistic thinking see about shared places, entrepreneurship, and city design? You obviously mentioned the idea that your monotropic thinking can focus so that you can get more ideas and better ideas about the quality or business or whatever. So the question is that what does autistic thinking see about shared places, entrepreneurship, and city design in general, that planners, engineers, and designers consistently miss?
I would say that we're more systemic, as in we're not coming in and this is why, I said before we started that I worked on urban regeneration projects, and I never realised at the time why I felt so good working on those projects. And it was because, that looking at the social, economic, environmental, the housing, all of that together, and seeing it systemically was how I think. And I think for autistic people, what we see, we're good at identifying gaps in systems and what's not being addressed properly, and being able to see the associations and what that means for other what can be missed as the consequences of changing something to another part of the city. And so I think it's just the way we think enables us to see things very holistically when we work.
So you're suggesting a sort of systemic thinking could help us going through this gap?
Yeah, because I think often we make changes to things and don't see the consequences of our actions as well. So having people that can hold all that data at once and be able to see, okay, if we change that, that's going to have an implication for that. You know what I mean? So that's just our natural way of thinking. So I think, to have more people who are involved, it blows me away, the focus of autistic people to be working on tech. Because there was this big research project that was done in the UK, and there is more university students employed who did autistic people employed that did creative arts than computing. And so I think to have autistic people involved in planning, they would be able to look at a city more holistically.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right, because I can see that many city design components at the moment are people are thinking separately. Like urban heat island effect is separate from drainage, from noise pollution, and everything else. Whereas if you got those monotropic understanding, so you could be able to connect things and create systems.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we discussed about all those shortcomings. If you had the power to change just one thing about Australian communities and built environment, what would it be?
I think if I had the power to change one thing, it would be people's attitudes towards autism and how that impacts on how they think about autism in their decision making. So instead of this charity model where we're seen as deficient, to actually recognise a social model of disability and recognise it's not us that's deficient, it is the way that our cities have been structured that are excluding us from participating. And for people to understand, have a better understanding of human rights. And there is under the Convention for Human Rights, we autistic people have got a right to participate in their cities. We've got a right to participate in mainstream services, not to have services that are just for autistic people. So I think if I could change anything, it would be changing people's perception about what disability is, and what the rights of and have a greater understanding of what the rights of people with disabilities are.
Brilliant. Let's move on to another chapter of your life, the Center for Autistic Social Entrepreneurship. You established the Center for Autistic Social Entrepreneurship because the environment you needed simply did not exist. What does this center provide that nothing else was providing before?
It provides, I guess, education into what innovation processes and business development processes look like that are based on autistic cognition. And it also, and the reason why I went for autistic social entrepreneurship rather than autistic entrepreneurship was that I make this statement that all autistic owned and led businesses are by their very nature social enterprises, because of the fact what we are doing is changing society's perception about what autism is. So that's a really high up there social goal, regardless of what the business is. And the other, I guess, social outcome from having autistic owned and led businesses is that autistic people have got a really high rate of unemployment. And it's a higher rate than the average disability unemployment. It's a lot higher rate. And the reason for that is that we need accommodations in the workplaces if we're going to overcome this sensory overload and this ability. We communicate differently as well. We're not inferior communicators. We're just that we communicate differently. And so the traditional way of addressing autistic unemployment is to have employers make accommodations for us. But that often doesn't work for many, many reasons. And so by focusing on autistic entrepreneurship, the other social goal is that we're changing the way people think about how do we address autistic unemployment, because the support currently isn't there for autistic entrepreneurship. All of the government programs, etc., are in providing employers with funding to make accommodations for these poor autistic folk, instead of supporting autistic folk to lead their own entrepreneurship endeavours based on their monotropic thinking. We've got all this knowledge. We're able to systemize products and services, yet there's no support for autistic entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. Well done. I know that you spoke already about the issues with the neurodiverse people and the city, urban heat island effect, noise pollution. But I want you to dive deep inside and paint us a picture. What does a street, a park, a neighborhood that genuinely works for autistic people actually feel like? And how do those three autistic capabilities reshape urban policy design and planning?
I think it's not just for autistic people. it's for mothers with babies, it's for elderly people, it's for children, to make it more understandable to walk through communities it's not only beneficial to autistic people. I'll give you an example of one of my bugbears is going to my local supermarket. And so supermarkets using these days the scanning machine. it's hell because you've got the lights, you've got the noise. But what makes it even worse is how they've positioned these scanning machines at my supermarket is you're either looking out onto the mall or you're looking into the supermarket. So you've got this movement happening at the same time. You've got the movement happening, you've got the sound happening, you've got the lights happening. You're having to follow a linear process when we're associative thinkers. So it's being able to see those things, but those things make it just as hard for elderly people to be able to take all of that in at the same time. So I think with everything that we're, as you're moving through a city, how I don't think it's a need for a city for autistic people. I think it's a need for a city where everyone can participate, even having quiet parts of the city. And I know when I went into the city last week to catch up with my daughter for lunch. And, we know the side streets in our city to walk through that are quiet. You know what I mean? So to have more of those laneways through a city where there's more greenery and there's less traffic, and to make those well known, the quiet path through the city sort of stuff. So a mother with a sleeping baby could be walking through that part of the city. So I don't think we need to create cities for autistic people. I think we need to make cities for everyone so everyone can be included.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This is the last question. What is your message to our audience, whether they are mostly building industry people, local councils, government agencies? What is your message to our audience?
Be more inclusive would be my message to the audience. Support autistic ways of thinking, recognize autistic ways of thinking, support opportunities for autistic cognition, stop expecting autistic people to have the same cognition as non-autistic people. I think about this, we're kind of like forced into, because of how everything's structured, into being poor non-autistic, to being poor thinkers because of the fact it doesn't match our own cognition. So everything we engage into, we can never excel at it because we're actually having to work in a way that's not our natural way of being. And so I think, if I think of it like conversion therapy for gay people, autistic people, to fit into this world, it's like conversion therapy, and we have to make ourselves be something we're not. And I think that's very unfair and quite cruel. So my message would be recognize autistic cognition, recognize the sensory overload that autistic people have to go through to participate, and to provide opportunities for autistic people to be their authentic autistic selves.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I'll learn a lot about autistic people and how we can design. I'm sure that our audience also enjoyed the discussion. I would like to thank you again for your time, and this brings us to the end of the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure.